It was solving a specific problem that was very personal to me.
If the Indian consumer understood the value of fitness in the preventative health journey.
Your platforms are so traditional, and the only way you can get consumers to come from brick to click is trust is built.
I also think the ability to say no, I think that comes with time. It's very hard to say no in the beginning, and then you prioritize, as you said. So organization, prioritization, and just knowing what to say yes and no to, I think gets you through basically a day at a time.
I think women just tend to be two things, which is amazing multitaskers, and I think we network.
So healthcare, medicine, it's always just been something that the women in my family have really, I would love to do something in India. That's my lifelong dream.
I'm always telling Jaya this because she's always so hard on herself. I'm like, it's okay, we'll get there.
What you're ultimately going to do may not even exist yet. So don't try and have all the answers for what you're going to be.
I think we need to stop putting ourselves in that bucket saying, I'm a woman and I can do this and I can do that and I can do. I'm a person who is juggling a lot, and some things I'm going to do well one day, some things I'm going to do well another day, and you find some sort of a balance.
If I'm very comfortable, then I'm stagnant. When I'm a little uncomfortable, that means I'm growing.
That's a good one.
Hi. Welcome to Circle, a podcast brought to you by Women Leadership Circle. I'm Jaya, Mehrotra, founder of WLC, and it's my absolute pleasure to co-host this show with Gayatri, Rangachari, Shah. Circle brings together very diverse and authentic voices of domain experts, pioneers, and thought leaders.
And I'm Gayatri Rangachari Shah, journalist, author, and your co-host. This platform is about sharing stories and insights that have shaped business, sparked innovation, and change. Today, we're diving into the dynamic worlds of art, healthcare, and wellness with two trailblazing women entrepreneurs who are redefining these industries in India. Our first guest is Minal Vazirani, someone who needs no introduction, I would say, across India's art and cultural space. She is the co-founder of Saffron Art, and the driving force in making Saffron Art from the very first online auction platform in India into something that has become a powerhouse and is today celebrating 25 years in the business.
And joining Minal is Malika Parekh, CEO and co-founder of Fluent Health. Malika brings with her 2 decades of healthcare experience. In her first venture at Physique 57, she's brought some of the best international practices to India and has created a very strong India following. And in her current venture, which is Fluent Health, she aims to give Indians a greater aim and control over their health. Yeah. And of course, today we are recording this podcast at Saffron Art Gallery. And trust me, I feel like a kid in a candy store. I'm very distracted with the art around us.
I think we all are. We spent a lot of time admiring the art.
Yeah, and thank you, Minal, for giving us this beautiful space. And we're really enjoying being here. And of course, it's so amazing to see some of very traditional consumer businesses, which is art and health, but being done very differently and not done traditionally at all. And 2 things are happening here. Women are seen to be doing very traditional roles, but you've taken 2 businesses which are so consumer-facing, so touch and feel, and launched them very differently. So let's dive in.
And actually, I have to say that I am a very big fan of Malika's Physique 57 platform that she brought over from the United States. And there's a whole cohort of people in this country who have benefited, especially during the pandemic when she, transferred all those classes online and we were able to sort of continue to work out online. So Malika, thank you for that. And to Jaya's point, Minal, Saffron Art is today celebrating 25 years, which is amazing. But if we go back to the dark ages of the turn of the century, 2000, internet penetration in this country was negligible. I think you said about 3 million users or something like that.
Yeah, there were about a little over 1 million connections, about 3.7 million
and probably
users
a dial-up modem or whatever, if anybody even remembers those days. And yet you chose to take something which is traditionally a very physical business, which is art, and marry it with technology to put it online. And auctions, which are again also very, require relationships and trust and all of that. and you put it, you sort of decided to move all of this online. How did that happen?
Well, in starting Saffron Art, it was, to oversimplify if I may, it was solving a specific problem that was very personal to me. And it was very much about sort of giving people like myself access to modern and contemporary Indian art. And there simply hadn't been enough material out there to learn from, to access, to view. So, yeah, someone who grew up in the US and studied art history, and engineering, and it was this kind of a strange combination, but I began veering towards the art side of my academic background because it was where I'd want to spend all my time. And, and of course, you study Indian antiquities because that's what's available. But going through to contemporary art, which I felt resonated more with me and my identity, it was really tough to access. And so when Dinesh and I moved to India, we began going to galleries.
Dinesh being your husband.
Dinesh being my husband and my business partner. We began going to galleries. I began looking at modern Indian art. I remember seeing a work of Raza up at Jahangir Art Gallery. There was a large show of his there, and going to galleries where his work was shown. And I was hooked. I don't know what else to say. It was an amazing experience. But to learn required me to physically go to galleries, speak to gallerists. And in those days, obviously, meet the artists, learn from them. But I couldn't have done any of that if I hadn't been living in India. Right. And it was a time when there had been a few international auctions, very few, outside India of this particular movement, so modern and contemporary, modern Indian art. And so I thought, well, there must be other people like me who've been wanting to learn, who want access to it and simply don't have it. So that's where the idea for Saffron Art originally came. But it didn't come when I was living here. I was actually in business school, and I took an entrepreneurial ventures course. And through that course, one of the questions that came up was, build a business that you want to spend time on. So I thought, I can come up with all kinds of industries. I'd worked in consulting, worked across industries. And I thought, well, that's all fine, but if I can choose where to spend sort of 12 hours a day, where would I spend it? What would I be doing? And it was such a clear answer to me. So I decided to do my business plan for an art business. And that was the origin of where Saffron Art came from. And really, it was initially about creating access for people who didn't have it. So that was the thought behind it. Then I got into sort of numbers, as you said, bringing it back to your question about internet penetration and does that make sense in India? But that wasn't my initial target audience. My target audience was very much the diaspora audience outside India looking in, where internet penetration was much higher. They didn't have access. This was the quickest, most efficient, and most cost-effective way to reach an audience like that and be able to provide them with access to acquiring art.
And I must add that I think Saffron is a pioneer because even the major storied Western auction houses, whether it was a Christie's or a Sotheby's, came very late to the space. Actually, it's really the pandemic that kind of made them really explore online auctions in a huge way. But I think you guys were doing it for, decades before that.
We were. Actually, I'm glad you brought that up. In fact, we, when we first started, everyone said, you're crazy. What are you thinking? Dinesh and I both had separate careers. So coming to this, didn't necessarily make sense to everyone. And when we started and went online, which was in April 2000, it was literally going online with a catalog of a little over 2,000 works of art with all of the details. And it sounds so intuitive and so obvious today, but we also started around the time Google did. Clearly we're a bit smaller, but it was, Google wasn't a verb then, right? You couldn't Google things, you couldn't search for things. Yeah. So you couldn't figure out what the price of a work should be. I could walk into 2 different galleries And it wasn't malintended, it wasn't anything, but their pricing for works by the same artist, similar period, were often very different. And it wasn't necessarily a difference in quality. It was just that everyone was kind of doing their own thing. It was difficult to assess. So when we did go online in April 2000, now exactly 25 years later, looking back, we realized what that did was give people an incredible amount of trust in being able to say, I'll go online, here's the work, I can see the image, I can acquire it, I can pay for it online, which you couldn't do before, and the work is delivered to me at my doorstep. If that meant redoing processes with FedEx in India, changing our company structure so that clients didn't have to necessarily deal with duties and taxes separately from their purchase. So it took a lot of doing on the back end, but that's really what it was about, was simplifying that entire thing. And then we got to the auctions. We did our first auction in December 2000. And that was really an aha moment, because the auction was over 5 days, which now sounds ridiculous. But it was 5 days. For 4 days before that, I don't think I went home. I went home to shower and would come back, because we were building the auction module. It was really tough to get it going. I sat and did HTML programming at that point. We were such a skeletal team, and put the auction out there. But it was incredible, because in 5 days we sold $126,000 worth of art. And I know that sounds like a tiny amount today, but in 2000 it wasn't. And what I realized was that's what was aggregating buyers. So we needed to create events. We needed to sort of push them to come together at a moment in time. And that's when we began looking at auctions much more seriously. Over the following couple of years, we did, of course, we learned from Christie's and Sotheby's, right? So they'd been doing it for a long time. But I think what we were doing was looking at it from the buyer's perspective. Right. And because we'd been buyers, we had been trying to build a small collection, and everything we did was around that. So changing the way you bid, changing how bids can come in, changing what viewers saw, figuring out what information to give to allow someone to make a decision. All of that was very intuitive from a buyer's perspective. And a couple of years later, we were leading the market beyond Christie's and Sotheby's. So that, we obviously headed in the right direction.
Malika, over to you now. I want to know that you have done 2 pivots, and you have 2 decades of experience in healthcare, and now you're a health entrepreneur. If you had to look back in hindsight, what were your aha moments, or those moments that you chose to solve this problem? And what are you trying to solve actually right now?
Yeah, sure. Thanks for the question. I feel like it's been many more pivots
Yes.
than 2.
Yeah,
maybe a little more than 2 pivots.
Yeah, even I say I have done 2 pivots, but I think I have done many micro pivots in my life. Yeah.
Exactly. No, so look, I've always been in the healthcare space. And my passion for health and my passion for health in India was always in the offline space. I have a family history of many physicians in the family. My grandmother went to medical school after having 3 kids. You can imagine that many years ago. So healthcare, medicine, it's always just been something that the women in my family have really adhered to. My mother was a business owner and a healthcare entrepreneur herself in the US for many decades. So I was wired to be in the health space. And I was raised by my parents to be very close, not just to the Indian culture in America. I was born and brought up in the US, but also to connect with the country and the people in the country and the way things worked in this country from a very young age. So I've had this passion has been born out of the connection to India and my passion for offline health. Many sort of years into my career, I met my now husband, who was actually one of my mentors at the time. We were family friends. He would check in once or twice a year. What are you doing now? I'm going to this now I'm doing this program. Now I'm doing this academic program now. And I kept studying. I'm actually a very passionate academic. I would probably still be in school if I could, if it were productive for my family. And checked in with him at one point, and he said, "What is it that you want to do?" It was 2 masters in, masters in public health, masters in medical science. I was going to medical school next, like within a few months. And he's like, do you want to practice medicine? Do you want to see patients day in and day out? What is it that you want to do? I said, I would love to do something in India. That my lifelong dream would be to, and this is when I was living in the US. I said, I would love to do something in India, but I feel like I need to be more credentialed. I feel like I need even more experience. I feel I may need to be a little bit more senior in my field for people to take me seriously. And he poked a lot of holes in that. He said, why? As we all know, you've studied enough. Now put it to use. Do some research, pause, and see what the market can tolerate today, because it's a very exciting market for healthcare. This was now 13 years ago. And so I did that, and I did a lot of research, and I was sort of pursuing an offline business model surrounding the areas of women's health, orthopedic health, and lifestyle diseases. So I wanted specialty centers of excellence. We wanted to develop specialty centers of excellence in sort of across those three verticals, because that's where we saw the greatest demand. But in my research for that, I realized that these women with orthopedic issues and lifestyle diseases had such an awareness for fitness and the importance of fitness in their preventative health. It's not something I thought at the time that they even acknowledged, and I didn't know the emphasis that that women in general, I'm making a huge generalization, but at the time I didn't know if the Indian consumer understood the value of fitness in the preventative health journey. They did. And the issue was that they didn't necessarily feel, apart from the big box gyms, the boot camp styles, and then a little bit of Pilates and yoga, they didn't necessarily feel that there were places and environments that were conducive for them, that were welcoming and approachable for them. And they didn't necessarily feel like the solutions that were there were sustainable. Enter Physique 57, because it changed and transformed my journey in the US. And I really felt that it would be something that the Indian woman would resonate with. And also felt that it was important to create spaces and environments where they felt like it wasn't just about their fitness needs, but also about building community. So that's kind of where the journey began, and more about where it went.
And Malika, just a 101, one-sentence explanation of what Physique 57 is for those who may not be familiar with it.
Yeah, I feel like I should let you explain it, but I'll do it this time. But next time it's you. No, so Physique 57 is a bar-based fitness method, backed in science. It started in the US. You get your cardio, your strength training, your stretching, all within a 57-minute period. It's low impact, low risk of injury, but high reward and moderate to high intensity. So you get, it's really effective. It's, we say it's super safe, but it's effective, it's efficient, because you get all your fitness needs within the hour, and it's fun. And that's sort of what it's all about.
So Malika, you're in healthcare, and last few years, wellness is going through such a big boom. And it's right, wellness is very center stage. I think there's so many podcasts actually made on wellness and well-being, female health. And you've chosen to launch this beautiful, fluent healthcare and a technology platform. So what is the problem you're trying to solve with this?
Yeah. So basically the glaring gap to me, and I'm not a tech person, never thought I would be in the tech space, but the glaring gap to me during the pandemic was to find something that would last beyond the pandemic era, because we knew that was going to be a phase at the end of the day. And the glaring gap to me lied with patients' physical health records. There's so much chaos and disorganization and inaccessibility as a result of not being able to consolidate and organize and digitize those health records. That became the premise upon which we decided to build. So the first step was to give patients, users, a way and a place, a hub, if you will, to organize their health records in a simple and easy to digest way. And it goes beyond that, but that's sort of where it started.
Your platforms are so traditional, and the only way you can get consumers to come from brick to click is trust is built. and you're trying to build that with the privacy, getting the best technology. So what advice would you have for somebody like her or me, that how do you build trust? Because you have to build a lot of trust. Yeah. So what are the frameworks to build such trust in businesses like these?
I mean, we were dealing with a very different kind of battle, but certainly for me, there was a hesitation about buying art from India online. There were two things. If it's someone of Indian origin, they say, well, I'll just buy it the next time I go to India. It's this idea that what you're buying is a unique piece, or it's not something you'll necessarily have access to if you walk into a gallery. That didn't quite come through. And the second thing is, I think the thought process was, well, maybe they're not charging me the right price. Maybe I'm not going to get what I see online. So there were all of those various elements of trust. And the way we did it was we actually had to take the art to them. So I did a whole series of exhibitions starting in 2001 in Hong Kong, in New York, Los Angeles, London, major art centers, and did curated exhibits of Indian art with a publication, and I know it sounds ridiculous, but until we did it in 2001 in New York, there had never been a curated large-scale exhibit of Indian art in that way in New York before, ever. It had only been antiquities.
So you had to go from, in a way, to get the online, you had to go offline.
Absolutely. And that's what we figured out. And it's kind of the same thing, because it's, as much as I may give some advice, the reason I asked the question is I want to learn what it means to do it in the healthcare space, because that's even more sensitive information.
Yes, yeah.
So it is about building trust, and it's about maintaining that confidentiality, because people don't want their art or their collections to necessarily be viewed by everyone. You may be buying things online, but it's going into your home, it's part of your personal life, your personal collection. In India, scrutiny on wealth and those factors did play a role in buyers and collectors wanting to be even more private.
And it's part of the journey to inform the user right from the get-go that their data is going to be anonymized as soon as it comes into our system. So all of the information is there, but it's front and center as opposed to hiding in the fine print. That's kind of the decision that we took, to make sure that users start to build trust. Eventually, we'll have to work with all the stakeholders in the system, doctors, hospitals, because once we get their buy-in and everybody's working together and deriving value from the same platform, I think that's going to be key.
Actually, entrepreneurship is a very spiritual journey also, because you suddenly, as an employee of a company, you can have a lot of filters and you don't have to take so much feedback. But I think what I can say for myself in the last 2 years, to apply this very simple thing she's saying, that listen to one line, ignore the others, it is not as easy as you're making it sound. Of course, it comes with, it comes with a lot of humility. It comes with a lot of ability to listen. A lot of us want to lash out sometimes, and so much criticism comes out, and you don't lash out.
No, you have to have a thick skin.
Yeah, and it's a paradox. Is it a thick skin or is it humility? It's a chicken and egg, right? There are days that you go back to the bees. I've cried to the pillow. That much feedback.
Oh God. It's how can you not, right? I think you've got to have kind of your professional work phase and in the workplace and all that, and you go home and it really is, sometimes it can really sort of just knock you out because it's frustrating, and it's it makes you question yourself. And it makes you question your ability and the track you're on, and your intellect and your ability. All of those things that come together, right? And for me, certainly, I also, having grown up in the US, I think being a professional woman in the workplace was very different from moving to India. And I transferred with my consulting firm here, but being a professional woman in the workplace here, where I was often the only woman on a project, sometimes out on factory sites, and it wasn't easy. And so you begin questioning kind of where you fit and whether you have the ability to see it through.
We are in 2025, if somebody hasn't caught up with the clock. And a lot of things keep me awake. And I wonder what keeps some of you awake. There's a lot of social media, there's a lot of information, there's a lot happening politically in the world. So, Gayatri, what keeps you awake in the night?
Yeah, I think, well, plenty of things to keep one awake at night. I think that the world is definitely at some kind of a strange inflection point today. We have obviously conflicts around the world. And I think that one of the things that we have to think about, at least here in India, as well as I think in the rest of the world, is how we consume news, where we get our news sources from. As a journalist, I do worry about the fact that younger generations, they're not necessarily reading newspapers or whatever, they're consuming their news information through social media. So depending on what the algorithm is feeding you, you are getting very targeted news segments or whatever it is. It's not like the olden days where maybe everybody got a newspaper, everybody watched certain television channels, whether it was in this country or around the world. Now you basically are getting very individualized news. And so your ability to think about and process the way you approach the world and approach issues is based on that very targeted consumption of news. And as a result, are you really able to see the other point of view? Are you able to engage in dialogue and understand somebody else's alternate position? This is the stuff that worries me. I don't think we are able to have the kind of tough and thorny conversations we would have in the past. There's really a very big political divide. And I don't think that it augurs well for a society. I think we need to be able to cross the line. We need to be able to understand each other's points of view. And I think in a country like India, which is so multicultural, which has a diversity of points of views, and where we all live, in close proximity to each other, these are the kinds of things that I hope that we as a society can continue to forge. I mean, we've managed for thousands of years. I'm sure we'll manage, but I do worry that with the rise of technology, that some of these things will sort of, become a lot more complicated.
I think really in terms of where the growth is coming from, of course, it's been a fantastic period of growth for us through the pandemic in particular, which was very surprising. I mean, the first year of the pandemic, we sold 4 times as much art as we did the year before. So that was incredible. And we've grown, we've developed, but in the future, I think for art and culture to scale here in terms of not just what is being consumed within India, but what we as a country and what we as a region are opening up to the rest of the world, I think that requires government support. I think it requires really re-looking at tax structures. There are countries around the world where they are reducing taxes and duties for the consumption or acquisition of art and cultural products, if I can say that. And what that does is it sort of nurtures those areas. We don't do that here. We don't have grants. We don't have financial support. So it's up to the private sector to foster and drive and really accelerate that growth. We don't have as many museums that are operating at the level that they should have. We have 5,000 years of aesthetic history and culture, one of the oldest in the world, but we are still, I think, not really confident enough to be the arbiters of our own quality. I think that's just starting. There are museums like, of course, the Kiranadar Museum of Art, which is really, I think, a national treasure as a museum. There are several private museums coming up. There are some public museums which have been doing amazing work. But the idea is this ecosystem has to develop for us to really be seen on the global stage. And that is of concern to me. There are numbers out there saying we're the 5th largest economy. We're one of the largest, cultural and artistic repositories in the world and have been. But so there's a real mismatch there. I mean, if you look at a kind of a golden period of trade in India, and if you're looking at, maybe the early 17th, late 16th century, late 16th really, we were 1/3 of the global GDP. 1/3. That's right. So I think if we're talking about, and the reason I use such an early period is when it comes to art, 10 years is a drop in the bucket. 50 years is an okay number, but we go back way longer, and I think that we need to understand on a continuum what we want to do with South Asian art and culture. And that's one of the reasons, rather than just focusing on the company the way it is in terms of revenue, quarter to quarter or year to year, what we've also done is bring in all these various aspects to help support and develop the entire art ecosystem. So where that's going is something that I do worry about.
I think my concerns are very, immediate and imminent, because we're in this go-to-market stage. So everything I'm thinking about, everything that I'm losing sleep over has to do with where patients and users will derive value. I'm just very curious now. We've been at this effort for a few years. We've built an amazing product. Like I said earlier, I'm very, very blessed to have an amazing team. But now it's going to market, and it's all the anxieties that come with that keep me up at night. I mean, I'm curious to see what they're going to gravitate towards.
Just taking from what Gayatri said, that a lot of content is very customized. And I'm also a leadership coach, and I meet people around the world, and I'm seeing a rise of anxiety in people. A lot of brainwashing is happening through technology. While technology is a great solution, but it has its cons. And the next generation that's coming in, I'm not sure that they're very resilient. And especially after the pandemic, when I see the kids around, I'm seeing an increased heightened anxiety, and that does keep me awake. That will this be a productive generation, or will we have a generation that falls off the productivity gap? And they're very burnt out. Their mental health conditions are the number of people who are depressed and anxious, the highest number ever that we are seeing. And that keeps me awake, that I hope the social media doesn't feed off this, the technology doesn't feed off this, but actually we kind of come to a more well-being state. And technology helps us build well-being and not takes well-being away. And that's the very hard paradox that I think.
That's why everyone has to go to Physique 57.
Yes. and fluent health, and maybe become paint. All of us have to paint.
Yes, exactly, and appreciate art.
Yeah.
It's interesting, though, that we're all I think what concerns us is where we're headed, as opposed to where we've come from. It's natural that looking towards the future causes that anxiety. But I remember that feeling, that spot that you're in, and it can consume you, day and night. And it's like, God, is this going to work? Is this going to happen? Are we going to raise this funding? Is this going to go live? Is it, and it's those immediate concerns at this stage. But I think it's so exciting what you're doing, that I imagine 1 year from now, it's going to be a whole different set of concerns and a whole,
Let's hope so.
Yeah, I'm sure it will.
That's a good segue actually into scaling, which is, I think, what we'd like to explore is, you're in beta, and you are now at this amazing standpoint where you're going to be marking 25 years. But when you started Saffron, and you talked about the initial years, bootstrapping, potentially even shutting the company down 2 years after you founded it. At what point were you able to think about scale and growth?
So, yeah, it was a tough time. After the joy of, taking it live and I've crossed that hurdle, which is a point that you're at now, we did feel it was successful, but we raised venture capital funding early from Chrysalis Capital and began growing, put a lot of money behind marketing, because that was the objective in those days, was to go out and build scale in terms of eyeballs and in terms of, having key metrics such as viewers and registrations and things. We weren't looking as much at conversions to revenue and profitability in the early days. And we found ourselves at a point in 2003 where we were close to running out of money. We'd invested a great deal, as I'd mentioned, in doing these shows in different cities around the world, in building out technology, creating new business processes. It took a lot of financial commitment. And in 2003, when a lot of this should have converted into an uptick in sales, we just weren't seeing enough revenue coming in. Keep in mind, the art market went from, I think, about the modern and contemporary global auction market was only $1.9 million in 2000. So when you talk about your market size, I really must have been an idiot to sort of enter a market with that, that size. But we were confident we could grow it. It did grow. I mean, in 2003, it went up to almost $5 million.
We're talking specifically about Indian.
Specifically about Indian, but auctions around the world. And I use auctions because it's a public measure.
Yeah.
So it had grown significantly, but as a company, we weren't making enough money. And we got to a point where we said, look, we're going to run out of funds, and we have to figure out what to do. We had to lay off part of our team, which was probably one of the most difficult things we've ever had to do, and decided that was something we never, ever wanted to do again. It was really tough. But we, instead of shutting down, decided we were going to bootstrap the company. And so we sold a bit of our own personal collection, funded it, basically began doing much of it ourselves, and got things off the ground. And I think what we found in a year later in 2004 is our initial investment in terms of what we were doing with Saffron art, but equally what we were doing in terms of growing the market had paid off. And what we saw in 2004 was a significant jump up in terms of pricing. I mean, I'll give you a quick example. The top price for a work of Indian art up until 2003 had been kind of in the tens of thousands of dollars. And in 2004, that threshold jumped up to $100,000. And then in 2005, the top price jumped to over $1 million. So we saw a hockey stick in how the market was growing. And why did that happen? It was, I think, there was such a transparency all of a sudden that you knew what this work should sell for because there was pricing data. And you could take a look at how things had moved. So, those early years were really tough. But I think having accurate information, which is a concern today in other fields, but having accurate information, trusting the buyer to make a decision as much as they trusted us to provide them with a service and a product, trusting them to make a decision was important. Art deals were done behind closed doors, and we brought everything out in the public domain. So I think that made a difference. And there was just a much wider installed base. There was a greater confidence, greater trust levels. And that's how we got over the hump and eventually ended up, having the largest market share globally for the auction market for Indian art.
Taking from where you were saying that you were bootstrapped early on, at WLC for the last 2 years, 15 months, we've been building WLC, and I know that your project, Fluent Health, is very purpose-driven and very impact-oriented. The good thing is the purpose and impact gives you the early fuel. We all feel very passionate about, oh God, I'm going to change the world. And that's what I think we're doing the podcast for. Today Gayatri is not well, but she's here because we want to make a difference, right? But somewhere the realization comes that first 15 months, 2 years, you've been able to go with passion and purpose, but you have to think about revenue and profitability. And that's a tightrope. I know when we were thinking about when we were building our strategy in Jan 2024, I was only thinking about how will the founding members come together, what will be the purpose statement. But now when I think me and Gayatri talk about WLC, we're constantly thinking of budgets, revenue, how will we monetize the business, how will we build revenue models, because more people join, more customers join, your vision keeps growing. And it's a tightrope. Purpose sounds very sweet and cute, but revenue is very important. And ultimately we're all missionaries here. You're not mercenaries.
Yeah, but I think if you believe in your product, which is I think what I think you believe in what you're putting out there, I think it happens. The question is obviously the inflection point, because you were able to fundraise, but you also bootstrapped. You're I think self-funding for now, and you might have an appetite to be able to take that to a certain point. And eventually, hopefully, the product works so that you're scaling, and then the revenue and the profitability will come together. I think
exactly.
And
that was the advice that I was given, honestly, by people in the investment community. Just as long as we're all working towards something that we can really stand by. And with all the noise that we've talked about and the stuff that keeps us up at night, as long as we can keep going back to, okay, but we know that what we're doing is going to derive value from our end user and our consumer. And as long as you can spend most of your day focusing on that experience, there are people that do this professionally for a living that will help you think about revenue channels and how to monetize the business and where the business can go. But if you can't stand behind what you're building 100% when they come on board, then they don't have the confidence to be able to do that. So I think it's important to focus on.
Malika, do you think about getting investors on board, or is that something that's not even anywhere near your horizon?
It's not right now. It's not right now. We're not looking at the moment. You know, we've fielded some incomings, to be very honest with you, and just really strongly believe in what we're building, and I'm not ready to dilute yet, so not right now.
So, Minal, you chose to dilute 6-7 years later, right, from the beginning. So, at what point it felt right to you to start getting investors on board? What was that point that now I can dilute and I'm happy to take investors? Was it a product innovation that you needed? Was it more money you needed? Or it was just the right time to kind of scale the business like a boom?
Well, after 2003, when we bootstrapped, got the company going, there was a great deal of momentum. You know, so revenue was growing. You know, 2 to 3x. It was significant, and then and grew from there. So in 2006, this was right after. So there was a Harvard Business School case study that was done on Saffron art at the end of 2005. Right around this time that the price, you know, for top work went above $1 million, and that year we sold a work of Sousa in auction for, I think, 1.4 million, and it was a huge jump up within 12 months. And so we had two HBS professors that were writing the case study. That came out in 2006, and it was around that time that we had generated enough revenue and enough profitability to kind of look at expanding the business, taking it to the next level, looking at what we wanted to do with additional technologies. And it's always been tech-driven because I did work in that space a little bit in consulting. So at that point, we were ready to go to the next level and to expand in a way that was significant. I think we did need to bring in additional funding. And we had a couple of firms speak to us. So we then brought in institutional investors, and we had some individual strategic investors involved. So we had, at the time, Sequoia Capital, Bear Capital, and Nexus and other institutional investors, and they came in. It was a great time to have closed funding well in advance of the crash in 2008. So we were in a great position at that point. So when, I have to say, going back to something I said earlier, so when the market came crashing down in 2008, we also were flush with cash, and we were very, very clear. Flush with cash in the sense, obviously, to invest, but we were very clear we weren't going to lay off a single person. We all took a hit on our compensation. I remember at that time, Dinesh and I didn't take a salary for a year, and we didn't lay a single person off. We kept growing because we had raised enough funding to be able to do that. We then went on to launch Story Ltd because we found that the market had been expanding and growing to such a degree that we needed to find ways of bringing in a much wider base of collectors. And so Story Limited was really to, at a lower price point, to a wider group, a great entry point for people. Yeah. And we launched that. We also then went on to launch a mobile app. And it was the first mobile app for fine art, almost real-time bidding. And that was incredibly successful over the next few years. So in fact, I think for several years, it was the highest value for that had ever been bid on on a mobile app for art had been at Saffron Art globally. And that was for about $1 million for a work of Tayyab Mehta. And it stayed that way. In fact, the then CEO of Christie's had met with us, had been in India and said, listen, it's incredible because even for us, when we launched our online app, our highest selling work was a work of Indian art to an Indian collector, and it stayed that way for years. And so, the message was, look, I think you guys have changed the way Indian art is purchased. It kind of changed the dogma of the industry, if you will. So there was a lot happening at that time, a lot that raising funding allowed us to do. There was a lot that it allowed us to explore. Of course, we learned from our investors. They brought in expertise, helped make, create broader networks for us. So it definitely made a difference.
When I heard you talking, and this is my last question actually, is that you said something very interesting, that you mentioned some 8-10 things you're doing. And I was like, how are you doing it? And I know that when I was speaking to Gayatri at the end of the week, that she was in Delhi, she was hemming one art show there, and she has something to do on Wednesday. And I know you do Physique 57 and now Fluent Health. Women are taking more and more on their plates, and we are stretched. And I'm just wanting to know, how do you balance, how do you prioritize? Because you've taken on like some 10 things you mentioned just now. I can't even remember some of them.
By accident.
But how do you balance? How do you prioritize? You have to, because otherwise you start burning out, right? Exhaustion, burnout. How do you balance? Because as women, we are building our brands, we're building our business, and sometimes we're building another second business on the side. That's a lot on the table.
It is. And I think, certainly for me, I've got 2 kids. You're kind of, I think, the center point we're center points for our families as well. I think women just tend to be 2 things, which is amazing multitaskers. And I think we network far better because we network not just professionally, but also personally. And I think we need other women in our lives to help us get through things, which is why I think what you're doing here is amazing. I think we need to support each other with much of what we're doing. The only metaphor I can think of is, especially sitting in India today, if you have, the goddess Durga, or who's kind of a multi-armed, multifaceted, multi-powerful being, you need all those multiple hands to be able to do all the things you want. And at one point I may have said, well, I'm just not able to do that, I'm not. But now I think, well, why not? Because I do have help, I do have support, and I'm able to, I've learned over the years. I think, 20 years ago or 25 years ago, I don't think I would have been able to. But now as I said, it's not just the support, but I know myself better. I know what I'm able to manage. I know what I can extend myself for. And you get into that rhythm of it.
I also think the ability to say no, I think that comes with time. It's very hard to say no in the beginning and, sort of maybe, in the early days and all that. But and then you prioritize, as you said. So organization, prioritization, and just knowing what to say yes and no to, I think gets you through basically a day at a time.
In the early stages of a business launch, you're doing go. There's a lot of go involved. And while I know today, 25 years into business, you have the ability to say no to certain things. In the beginning, your no's are a little low. You have to do a lot of action to get some feedback, loop backs. So how are you looking ahead of this year? How are you going to balance children, family, and 2 ventures on the side as we speak?
Yeah, I think one of the questions that you had asked me when we were sort of chatting before this was about an experience that changed you. And I think for me, and I'm sure everybody at the table can relate, so many women that will be watching this can relate, but to have, a twin pregnancy, twins, launch the business 1 month later, and have an ailing parent, all at the same time. That was an experience that definitely changed me. Recently, I was interviewing someone actually for a very senior position in the company, hopefully who will join imminently. And he asked me, I said, any questions? And he asked me a question. He said, I don't want to know about your financial runway. I'm not going to ask you that, which is what the question that, of course, as a startup, we always get. He said, I want to know about your mental runway. And I want to know about your mental fortitude. Are you ready for what you're about to embark on? Because I know he's checked everything out. He knows I'm a mother. He may not know about the ailing parent, but he knows I'm a mother. He knows I'm a wife. He knows, about the other business. He knows that there's sort of many tasks and many things at play. Yeah. And this was the question that he asked me, do you have the mental fortitude? And I think what you said, one day at a time, just trying to get through, and get into an environment, an ecosystem, build an ecosystem where we can continue to maintain the mental fortitude to get through all the tasks is the best that we can expect of ourselves.
I think one of the things I've learned in the last 1 year of doing what I'm doing, that while you can be everywhere, but certain places you will never reach. And it's okay to get, some people and some relationships will get disappointed by you because you can't just get everywhere. Yeah. And as an entrepreneur early stage, your capacity and capabilities will be tested every day. Just when you think, oh, wow, you're so smart, you got this transaction so right, and you did this so well. Oh, next Monday, oh, I've reached the end of my game. This is the best I can do, and I need to just expand a little more.
So, rapid fire. A book, artwork, or experience that changed how you see the world?
So I just said, actually, experience was twin babies, 1 month later launching the business, simultaneously, finding out that I was dealing with a very sad situation with an ailing parent. Experience that changed me and really shifts your perspective.
I think my own experience was my divorce in 2008. It made me shed multiple layers of what was expected of me as a woman. And I started from ground zero in terms of how I want to look at the world. Anything that was fed to me by society, by books, and the sheer framework of religion, politics, family, all of that I shed as a person. And I rebuilt who I was and what I wanted to look at the world as. My worldview shifted, and I chose to build my own worldview, not what was told to me anymore. And I'm still doing it. And it was one of the best things happened to me.
That's fantastic.
So I will say I was on a plane on 9/11, going to New York City, and someone behind me was like, someone just flew a plane into the Twin Towers, and I was like, what an idiot! Didn't he see that giant building? Obviously, so clueless. And then, of course, we were diverted to Alaska, and eventually I made my way to Manhattan, and then I had a flight to catch to London. But I think that really changed my entire perspective, because I was supposed to land in New York like 2 hours later from after the attacks happened. It could have just as well been my flight or whatever, who knows. So I think that definitely changes you, because it's such a freak of nature accident. Act of terrorism, of course, but it changed the way I decided to approach my entire life. So that is an experience which is, of course, profoundly full of sorrow, but it changed the way I looked at the world.
Gosh, I think there have been these several experiences or inflection points which have altered the course of my life in some way. But I think one just related to the business is very early on I was working in consulting and was on a project in Indonesia. It was a very exciting project, great team, all of that, but it was a time at which the country was going through a great deal of turmoil. So they had and this was years ago, they had the Bank Bali scandal, the rupiah there devalued dramatically overnight. There were riots in the streets. There was even someone shot outside our office building. It was a terrifying time. We would come into work every day with our luggage because we couldn't figure out whether we'd have to rush to the airport. And it was fine. We got through it. The team and I went to work out of our Singapore office, and we'd literally fly in for meetings and fly back out. But it was so stressful because it wasn't just about work and business. It was about safety and life and death, and it was a really difficult time. That it was then that I sort of said, look, as much as I like what I do, I'm ready to make a change in my career. So, and that's and that's when I dusted off the business plan and decided to start the company.
Your go-to mantra when things get tough?
The great Maya Angelou said, do the best you can until you know better. Then, when you know better, do better. I just think that's really simple and basic and gets me through the day to day.
That's fantastic. Yeah. I think for me, it's, it's more when I'm going through a tough time, and it's really simple. It's this too shall pass. In fact, there was an artwork that this Azerbaijani artist did at I want to say it was at the Venice Biennale. I remember seeing it thinking, oh my gosh, there's my motto, But yeah, definitely that phrase.
Yeah, I have to echo Minal in that one. I also believe in this too shall pass, and the Italians also have the saying that, you'll get through it, it's okay.
Yeah.
So, of course, in different stages of my life, I have different mantras. But right now, for me, the mantra is comfort zone is danger zone. If I'm very comfortable, then I'm stagnant. And I'm a little uncomfortable, that means I'm growing.
I like that.
That's a good one. That's a good one.
So it's very much what I've pushed myself to do in the last couple of years. Say, I'm ready to not sit back. I can kind of get out and say yes to all the things I've said no to before. Yeah.
A person or mentor who has influenced your journey, Jaya?
I think in India, of course, I think, while I don't know her personally, but the way Falguni Nair is building her business, had built her business in late 40s, it gives me that sense of strength that, we all are 40-some plus women, and we can do things at a different stage of life. Not everything has to be done right about 25 or 35. So I just like the fact that she took her time to build the business. And that's a beacon for me, yeah.
I've been fortunate to have a few mentors, but my physician mentor, Dr. Nayan Qatari, he's our physician and somebody I shadowed and worked with for many years in the US. And, you come to this, again, one of the early inflection points where you're trying to figure out what you're going to do with your life. And he said, what you're ultimately going to do may not even exist yet. So don't try and have all the answers for what you're going to be. At that point it was, are you going to be a doctor? Are you going to be a lawyer? Are you going to go in business? Are you going to, are you going to go in the arts? He said, just what you're going to do does not even exist yet. That's where we are in the world. So don't try and have it all figured out from day one. Just enjoy the journey.
I mean, like you, I've had different people definitely that mentored me that I would lean on for advice. But I think at a personal level, more so, I think my father has been just a rock, and both my parents, but definitely my dad is like my rock solid go-to, whether it's personal, professional, it's always a positive influence, yeah.
I also have to say my parents have played an enormous influence in my life, and my mother always taught my sister and I, she always made sure, she was like, we had to do something with our lives. It was just non-negotiable. So because of that, I've worked, I think, since I was 20 years old or whatever it was, since I graduated from college. And so I think that kind of, and she'll always like call me and say, oh, what are you doing now? So it's like, oh my God, when can I just retire? But yes, I think both of them.
So how do you define success? Short answer.
Yeah, short answer.
Very one line. How do you define success in this moment?
Another 25
I mean,
years.
the fact that I can sit here and have the luxury of choosing how I define success, frankly, I think is successful in itself.
I think no one else should say anything after that. That's like, I echo that. I think that's perfect.
No, but I like what the two of you had said earlier, which I definitely feel is an important measure of success for me, and that is building something that outlives and outexpands my contribution or input or personality or brand. I think to me that is having created something successful.
Yes, absolutely. And sometimes success in the beginning doesn't feel good in the body. You're constantly being stretched. You're in challenging moments. But if you have a lasting impact, it feels satisfying later on.
I mean, the thing is, you won't know that till the end.
Yes.
Right? What I mean? Till a certain different point in your life.
Absolutely.
When you have the hindsight, the ability to be able to look back.
Yes.
Yeah.
But you probably didn't think that you'd be here in 2025,
No,
right?
I didn't. I didn't. I mean, it's not that you talked about creating something big, But when I started, honestly, it was about building a small business, doing the things I really wanted to do, solving a specific problem. I wasn't thinking at that point about, I have to achieve this scale. When I started going out for funding, yes, I did think about growth at that level, but it wasn't my initial driving force.
With that, well, thank you all so much. With that, I'd like to conclude this episode of Circle. Minal and Malika, thank you so much for sparing your time so generously with us and for sharing your journeys and totally different vantage points, but also so many similarities because of the tech aspect of what both of you are doing, and also, frankly, pioneering these industries in India. And Jaya, of course, always so much fun with you.
Yes.
So thank you all so much. And thank you to all of you for being so patient.
Yes. Thank you for having us.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank
so much.
you.